And then in the spirit of this holiday and the name of the man who led us forward, not alone, but with so many other voices that we wish to lift up today and that have inspired us and continue to inspire us, I want you to join me in reading together. It's number 584 in your silver hymnal. It's a work that is often read within Unitarian Universalist churches, and indeed in ecumenical settings of all sorts. We know it as a network of mutuality, and your part is in italics, number 584. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that succeeds, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
We shall hew out the mountains of despair, a stone of hope.
May it yet be so. And the third reading today is a prayer poem, really, by an African-American Unitarian Universalist minister named Reverend Amy Petrie Shaw. And she entitles this, God Gave Me a Word. I was talking with God the other day, because we're cool like that. And God said, hey, I want you to tell people something. And I was kind of busy, so I pretended like I didn't hear. And God poked me and said, I'm not kidding, pay attention. Because while we're cool, we aren't that cool. And I know when I have pushed it way too far. So I put down my coffee cup, and I turned around, and I paid attention. And God said, let me hang a word on you around your neck so that everyone can see it. And you better speak it when you're out, because I'll know if you don't. And it will be heavy, so heavy on your soul if you don't. And a word was hung around my neck to take out to the people standing in the streets. A word was preached into my ear and laid into my mouth and burned into my heart until all I could see was the shape of the word. And the word was all. And the word was love. And God said, now get out there because you don't have all day and that word is going to get heavier and you got some work yet to do. So I'm taking my word out to the world. Love came down on this green earth. Love came down and turned over the tables and set the world on its end. Love made it clear that it was the word for the poor and the brokenhearted, for the queer boy and the angry girl. Love was the word for late-night hookers and the long-haul truckers, and for the heroin junkie and the runaway cutters. Love was the word for all of the screwed up and pushed over and too tired and I can't take it anymore. Love was the word for the HIV patient and the man with no papers. Love was the word for me and for you, for the saints and the sinners and the scramblers in between. Love came down and made a way for there to be a way. And then love said, we are never going back. Love said we are all a part of something bigger, and if you cannot rise with us, if you cannot love with us, then you should get the hell out of the way because we aren't going anywhere and you are in the path. Love came down for the world to know, and I'm holding out this word, so even when you and God are just like that, and you can't pretend you didn't know, I cannot put it down. I cannot put it down, not for a politician spewing hatred, not for a minister vomiting out bile in the costume of a saint, not for money or for country or for kin. I'm holding my word in my mouth because the next time I see God, I want to be able to say, you gave me a word and I carried it just the way you asked. You gave it to me and I took it. You showed it to everyone and I showed it to everyone I met. You gave it to me and I showed it to her and your and Z and him. I showed it to them and they and those over there. I never put it down. We can never put it down. I was talking with God the other day because we're cool like that. And God said, hey, I want you to tell people something. So I put down my coffee cup and my phone and my computer and I turned around. And then God gave me a word, and now I've given it to you. And the word is love. Now start moving. Love is both our source and our destination, our call and our response. And love, it turns out, is fractal. Fractal. And what happens on the small scale reverberates to larger and larger scales. So first, a word about fractals, so we can visualize this together. Fractals are infinitely complex patterns that are self-similar across different scales. Self-similarity means that as you look closer and closer into the details of a fractal, you can see a replica of the whole. In other words, what happens on a small scale keeps repeating over and over into more and more complex and larger patterns. Fractals are found throughout nature, from the remarkably small to the unimaginably vast. And in the words of the Afrofuturist activist, author, and radical dreamer, Adrienne Marie Brown, she says, just look at the delta around New Orleans. And then look at how those veins and artery systems move through your system and your heart and your lungs. Look at the spiral shapes on your fingertips, if you would so. Look at that. And then look at the shape of galaxies. The universe, she says, has some favorite fractals. And they repeat at every scale. In this way, fractals our way of seeing reality. Fractals can also inspire how we think about our lives and our communities. The patterns we develop on the smallest scales replicate over and over, branching out into the world, growing in complexity but still recognizable. That's one reason for the efficacy of both spiritual disciplines and religious communities. So we can practice on a small scale, individually and collectively, what we want the world to look like on a larger scale. Again, from an interview on the podcast On Being with Krista Tippett, which I recommend to you, Adrienne Marie Brown talked about it this way, slightly edited for clarity. She says, I was doing electoral organizing in 2004, and we're gearing up. It's post 9/11, we're going to war with Iraq and Afghanistan, and we feel we've got to get Bush out of office, so we're doing all this organizing, and it clicked for me. You know when you finally see something or get something, and you can't unsee it? Do you know?
Yes.
Okay. And I was like, oh, we are trying to just change the top layer of this very layered cake, this very layered process, this system of governance. We think that if we just win the presidency, that then we'll be able to change the world. And it clicked for me that it's actually a fractal system. It's layer on top of layer on top of layer. And if none of us are practicing democracy in our lives, it's not going to just suddenly work at the top layer. And I got it. And then I realized something about smallness. I was able to gain respect for because I was like, every single large system or structure or network or political protocol, all of it is made up of small things, of human beings, either having or not having necessary conversations, and people being willing to stand up for what is right and stand up against what is wrong. It's all these small activities that we need to get great at if we want to actually have anything that would be a real democracy and real love. So, and here's the point of all this. So then she asks, what's happening in your life and in the relationships you have with your family, and how do you treat people when you're upset with them? I always ask people that, she says, when I talk about transformative justice. Are you punishing anyone right now? And could that punishment be shifted into a boundary setting or a request? Is there a courageous conversation that needs to be had in your life? How do you personally begin to practice whatever's in alignment with your largest vision? For love is something we practice every day in our lives. Liberational love, emergent strategies, all of these are things to practice every day. End quote. Upon reflection, what this says to me is that we can't change the highest level without changing the smallest, because patterns repeat. Either patterns of greed and violence, or patterns of authenticity and love. And so to change the world, the God of our understanding gives us a word to hang around our necks and bring into the world. And that word is love. But what does that mean? Expanding from the passage in Corinthians we sang this morning, though I may speak with bravest fire, we're given practical, explicit descriptions, a prescription of what love is and isn't, and what it does and doesn't do. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. I think love means something particular, relevant, and challenging to Unitarian Universalists. For if and when we claim to be Universalists, that means we put love, or try to put love, at the center and try to extend it to everyone. But it always brings up for me, what are the limits of love? If we believe that no one is outside the reach of love, this network of mutuality, if we believe that we affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of everyone, then no one, in theory, is to be outside that circle of compassion and love. And this understanding guides our practice of love. That means we love, we care for, we are patient with, we are kind towards, we want to the best for, we actively work for the thriving of the poor and the brokenhearted, the queer boy and the angry girl, the late night hookers and the long haul truckers, me and you and everyone we know, the saints and the sinners and the scramblers in between. And it means we extend love to Trump.
Yeah.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene, and anyone else you want to fill in the blank while you're shaking your head or shrugging your shoulders. And this is where love gets more complicated, yes?
Right.
Historically, Universalism was the belief no one would go to hell, that there was universal salvation. Love was that powerful, more powerful than death. This freed our Universalist ancestors to stop worrying about the afterlife and instead get busy to bring heaven to earth. It was up to us to replicate the eternal fractal of the afterlife here on earth in this lifetime. And there's a great story about Hosea Ballou, a major theologian and early 19th century Universalist. He was traveling through the New Hampshire hills with a Baptist preacher. They were both itinerant preachers, spreading the good news, their own brand. And they were discussing, probably actually arguing, theology as they traveled. And the story goes, at one point, the Baptist, in frustration, looked over and said, "Brother Ballou, if I were a Universalist and didn't fear the fires of hell, then I could hit you over the head, steal your horse and saddle, and ride away. And according to your Universalism, I'd still go to heaven." And Hosea Ballou looked over at him and said, "Brother, if you were a Universalist, that very idea would never occur to you." So what thoughts are you thinking? The idea would never occur to you. If you believed to your very core that all were loved, all were worthy, it would never occur to you to hurt another intentionally. For Universalists, the motivation to do the right thing is motivated by love and not fear or retribution. But the question is, how do we bring that kind of love into our daily moment-to-moment consciousness? Let's put a pin in that for a minute. Nancy Massman, Unitarian Universalist humanist, hospice pioneer, and the mother of my colleague, the delightful Sarah Smalley, says, "If there is a hell, good people should go there to relieve the suffering of the people there." Any volunteers? It is impossible for there to be heaven if people are suffering. Wherever there are pockets of hell here on earth, that is where love goes to relieve suffering. As Universalists, a word is hung around our necks and preached into our ears and laid into our mouths and burned into our hearts until all we see is the shape of the word, and the word is love. That is the aspiration of Universalism. But this does not mean we are always polite. This does not mean we prioritize compassion for Trump or others who hurt and harm and most marginalized over the thriving of the most marginalized. Power without love is reckless and abusive, said the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. How do we maintain the balm of love and power, especially when dealing with adversaries and injustice? Again, we look to our history. In a sermon preached on February 18th, 1872, almost 152 years ago, the Reverend Olympia Brown wrestled with these same questions. Reverend Olympia Brown was one of the first women ordained by a denomination in the United States, and she was a brilliant and ardent Universalist, which means she refused to let anyone forget about the power of love. And her theology is steeped in universal Christianity. And I am inspired by her sermon, Christian Charity, a doctrinal sermon for Universalists. In this sermon, she stakes her claim that the only doctrine we are beholden to is that of love. And she starts her sermon with these words: "Beloveds, if God so loved us, we ought to also love one another. We say God is love, and if Universalists believe in a God, it is the God of love. They believe in a God who looks with equal eye upon all God's children, who can never be alienated or estranged from any, who will ultimately bring every wandering soul home, reconciled and confirmed in the good." Later in her sermon, she goes on to ask the 1872 equivalent of the current question, even Trump? She answers, it is easy to pronounce severe condemnation upon a wrongdoer and to declare our horror of such inequity, but it is the part of charity to consider the circumstances which surrounded the guilty one. When some notorious man like the robber baron James Fisk has come to be known far and wide for the magnitude of his wrongdoings, his lies and his harmful behaviors, then it is easy to join in the general outcry. But a true love of virtue would rather rebuke that iniquitous state of society, that system which made a James Fisk possible. A true and loving charity would seek out the influences which had produced such a character. Olympia Brown shows compassion for the robber baron James Fisk. We can have compassion for Trump. We see the humanity of Marjorie Taylor Brown. But love is a rebuke of inequities that make the kind of power possible. The complicated thing about Olympia Brown, though, pointed out by a female colleague of mine, is that yes, she was a brilliant and ardent Universalist minister and a brilliant and ardent suffragist, and she was fighting primarily for the rights of white women. She supported a system where lip service was paid to God-loving everyone, but decades of actions and political will left black women and others out of love's circle. So, my female counterpart reminds me to ask, what fractal pattern of Olympia Brown are we repeating today as Unitarian Universalists? How, as a denomination and a congregation and people, do we prioritize whiteness, marginalization, and individualism, knowingly or unknowingly? Universalism and this kind of white universalism are also a part of our lineage. We just own it. Austin Channing Brown, writer and speaker on racial justice and black dignity, says, I am confused by people who say they love us but are never upset when we are treated unjustly. The two simply cannot coexist. A love that's aloof isn't a love I have any use for. I need a love that is troubled by injustice. Love came down and turned over the tables and set the world on its end. And that's a kind of love that feels unfamiliar, that makes me nervous in my belly, a kind of love that feels risky and scary and challenges to me at a fractal level. It's a change in the fractal world I live in. Patterns of safety and niceness are easy to replicate. Patterns of courage and justice are harder to scale. I know we don't talk a lot about Jesus in Unitarian Universalist churches because the Bible has so often been used as a tool of empire and control, but it's hard to talk about liberating love without mentioning the life of this dark-skinned Palestinian prophet of radical love. I'm reminded of the quip after a conservative Christian visitor sat through a UU service. He complained to a member that they denied the divinity of Jesus. And the member responded, we don't deny the divinity of anyone. We don't deny the divinity of anyone, including Jesus, including me and you and everyone we know, and the saints and the sinners and the scramblers in between. In the words of Brene Brown, talking about the life of Jesus, Jesus comes and says, okay, I am love. I sit with the people you're not allowed to sit with and talk to them. I do all the hard things. I make all the hard choices. I love the people that are unlovable. I don't tolerate shame. I am love. And it's hard, and it's messy, and it's dirty. And if you really love, I mean fierce, big love, you'll become dangerous people. Feeling dangerous?
Yeah.
Love, real love, transformational love, universalist love, means we change fractal patterns. This is dangerous to the status quo, even within ourselves, in our lives, in our communities, in our nation, in our world. But the story of Jesus, as it is currently told as the dominant story of religion in the United States, has been a fractal pattern of individualism, shame, and fear. The story of whiteness and patriarchy is a fractal pattern of domination, greed, and enforced apathy. They play out on both remarkably small and unimaginably vast levels. What would a new emerging fractal of love and liberation be like in your life, in your world? What fractals of love might start simple and small and grow wider and ever more complex? Maybe it starts with the husband or father who finally goes to therapy to break patterns of generational abuse. Maybe it starts with the white woman who time and time again learns to prioritize truth and justice over comfort. Maybe it's forgiving someone who has hurt you, or maybe it's enforcing boundaries and not allowing them to hurt you anymore. Maybe it's a religious community taking seriously the call to welcome the stranger, even if it means what's familiar must change. Maybe it's all of us picking up heavy, radiant, challenging love every morning, hanging it about our necks, and showing it to everyone we meet, beginning with and including ourselves. Beloveds, this is where we begin. Love is given to us as our birthright, and we must carry it into the world. We have been given love, and we can never put it down. On the path of love, we can never put it down. Begin where you are, as you are, but don't stay there. Love is our religion, beloveds. Speaking bravely, boldly, wisely. Let's start moving.